From the depths of the internet, this is Movies to Go. Hey everyone, and welcome to the debut episode of Movies to Go. I am your host, Blackcatloner, a random cartoon black cat on the internet who has been known to review movies on YouTube from time to time. I am what is known as a pingtuber, spelled PNG, or a content creator who uses an avatar to do videos. I went this route a couple years ago because modern YouTube, and basically because of the harsh climate on the internet these days. But enough about that. This is supposed to be a podcast about movies. Now, why is this podcast called Movies to Go? Well, when I was a wee kitten growing up in the 80s and 90s, before there was internet, and definitely before Netflix and other streaming sites, there was a thing called video stores, where we would go and rent movies on video cassettes to watch them on a now obsolete device known as a video cassette recorder, or VCR, and one of these video stores where I would go to rent said movies was called Movies to Go. I'd say where this place is, but that would be doxing. And the purpose of this podcast is that I intend to review movies that were released before the current insanity that is modern Hollywood, where movies are not being made to entertain, but rather to push, as my esteemed colleague, the critical drinker, likes to call, the message. That means we'll be looking at movies that were released before 2016, even though I'm probably going to make exceptions from time to time. I do have plans to talk about last year's Top Gun Maverick, but not today. On today's show, we're going to take a look at a movie that celebrated its 30th anniversary last week, and is one of my favorite movies ever. Of course, I'm talking about the classic Michael Douglas thriller, Falling Down, which was directed by the late Joel Schumacher, who was notoriously responsible for directing Batman and Robin, one of the worst comic book movies ever made. And he was also known for directing such classics as St. Elmo's Fire, A Time to Kill, and The Client. But personally, Falling Down was his best movie, and I'm sticking to it. As you know, prior to his death in 2020, the name Joel Schumacher was not thought of in the highest regard because of one movie. Come on now, I know you all know what it is. The name Joel Schumacher was notorious because he directed one of the worst superhero movies of all time, Batman and Robin. A movie that all but killed the Batman franchise, and nearly killed comic book movies in general, until the genre was resurrected by the successes of comic book movies such as the original X-Men movie in 2000, and the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie in 2002. In addition to Batman and Robin, he was also notorious for directing that god-awful version of Phantom of the Opera, despite the fact that this movie gave us the hotness that is Emmy Rossum. With all this, Joel Schumacher was capable of directing a good movie. As I mentioned in the beginning of the episode, he directed such classics as St. Elmo's Fire, as well as such John Grisham adaptations as The Client and A Time to Kill, which I actually thought was the best Grisham adaptation, especially because of Samuel L. Jackson. Yes, they deserve to die. I hope they burn in hell. Which brings us to the movie we're reviewing today. And this Joel Schumacher movie can easily be considered the best movie he's ever directed. Let that sink in for a minute. The same man who gave us the Bat credit card also directed one of the best revenge movies ever made, and a movie that just last week celebrated its 30th anniversary. The 1993 revenge thriller, Falling Down. Falling Down, a movie whose title is a reference to the famous nursery rhyme that figures prominently throughout, was released at a time when America was coming out of the Cold War, and as a result, the government didn't see a need for defense contract workers, so they laid them off. And the movie also came out at a time when America was becoming decadent in their ways with a new set of rules, as well as a more blended culture. Gee, does that sound familiar? Because it sounds more like today's world, except today's world is much worse. Racial tensions were high back then as they are now. In fact, this movie was filmed during the LA riots of 1992. Production had to be shut down for a few days. In fact, if you judge this movie in terms of relevancy, this movie is just as relevant today as it was 30 years ago. Hell, it was relevant in 2015 when I originally reviewed this movie for YouTube, but I ended up yeeting the original review along with the rest of my original content again because modern YouTube. I read an article and tweeted it the other day on Twitter saying that Falling Down would not be made today, mainly because of the fact that the main character can be viewed as a metaphor for Trump supporters. As far as that article goes, I totally disagree, because I feel like this movie would be an even bigger hit now than it was in 1993 when it was originally released. When I first saw the trailers for this movie, again when I was a wee kitten, where the narrator says, "When life does this," and it shows Michael Douglas getting mugged and stuff, and then the narrator says, "Don't you want to do this?" And then it cuts to Michael Douglas punching out a road rager, shooting up a phone booth, and blowing up a construction site, among other things. When I saw this, I knew I had to see this movie. And I eventually got the movie on video, and I enjoyed the shit out of it. And even today, it still holds up. But enough of my ramblings, let's get into the movie proper, so without further ado, here we go. The movie begins with Bill Foster, played by Michael Douglas, in his best role since his Oscar-winning portrayal of Gordon Gekko in Wall Street, a recently fired defense contract worker who finds himself stuck in traffic on the hottest day of the year in LA. Almost immediately from the get-go, you can tell this guy is unstable, because in addition to being frustrated over being stuck in traffic and it being so hot, he's also divorced from his ex-wife Beth, played by Barbara Hershey, who also has a restraining order against him, again because he's a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And after a brilliant tension-filled montage where all these assorted images, such as the vicious-looking Garfield plushie, are seen flashing in front of his eyes, Bill finally leaves his car, license plate Defense, but spelled D-F-E-N-S, and proceeds to walk across LA in an attempt to get home for his daughter's birthday, despite his ex-wife's restraining order against him. Ironically, also stuck in that same traffic jam is police detective Sergeant Prendergast, played by Robert Duvall, who is on his way to work for his last day before he retires. Ironically, like Foster, Prendergast is a man who has also been screwed over by life. His daughter died from sudden infant death syndrome, and his wife is a little bit super naggy, and she's the one who's forcing him to retire from the force. And speaking of the force, his boss looks down on him for being too clean cut, no swearing, no F-bombs and stuff. And he's also disrespected by his coworkers, save for his partner Sandra, played by the actress from the Arnold version of Total Recall. Yeah, we ignore that Colin Farrell one. Throughout the movie, Prendergast becomes obsessed with Foster, and throughout the movie, he follows up every lead whenever Foster commits a violent act. In the meantime, Foster, or Defense as he is known in the credits, stops off at a convenience store run by a Korean-American shopkeeper who won't give him change for the phone unless he buys something. He picks up a can of soda and, expecting it to be 50 cents, is outraged when the shopkeeper charges him 85 cents, which won't leave him enough money for the phone. A struggle ensues and Defense steals the shopkeeper's baseball bat and proceeds to destroy the store until the shopkeeper agrees to sell him the soda for 50 cents. And then shortly after that, he nearly gets mugged by two gang members who threaten him with a switchblade, but Defense fends him off with the baseball bat and gets the switchblade after the gang members flee. At this point, the movie becomes like a modern-day video game where he acquires new weapons after every encounter. Gee, wonder if this movie predicted the Grand Theft Auto franchise. The street gang later catches up to Defense as he's on the phone stalking his ex-wife and telling her he's coming home for his daughter's birthday, and they attempt to off him in a drive-by shooting. However, the gang has the shooting ability of Star Wars stormtroopers and hits everyone but him, and then crashes their car in a nearby alley. Defense is back in video game mode as he steals the gang's gym bag full of guns. When Defense picks up the Uzi and points it at the helpless gang member, I think Schumacher was going for an homage to the classic "Do you feel lucky" punk speech from the original Dirty Harry. However, it ends with Defense putting a bullet in the thug's leg and says, "Take some shooting lessons, asshole." Love that scene. Afterwards, there's a couple of side trips that involve Defense giving up his briefcase to a homeless man who claimed to be a veteran. The briefcase contained his lunch, which consisted of a sandwich and an apple, and an encounter with a black guy who is dressed exactly like him, who gets arrested by the cops for protesting in front of a bank for not being economically viable. And as the cops take the man away, he tells Defense to not forget him, to which Defense nods in respect. Then his next stop is a fast food restaurant where he tries to order breakfast but finds out he's 2 minutes late. Demanding that the manager honor the age-old saying, "The customer is always right," Defense pulls out an Uzi and accidentally fires into the ceiling. Another humorous scene. And then changes his mind and orders lunch and then rants about how his burger doesn't look like the picture. Okay folks, I got a quick question for you. What's the male version of Karen called? Oh, and by the way, you know the fast food worker that Defense first talks to in that scene? Michelle Pfeiffer's sister. Soon after that, Defense stops off at an army surplus store that is run by a closet Nazi skinhead, who, when we first meet him, he's publicly insulting a really buff gay couple, who could probably easily kick his ass. The Nazi store owner is in awe of Defense because he was listening in on Defense's alleged vigilante activities on his police scanner to the point where he hides Defense when the police, namely Prendergast's partner Sandra, comes into the store looking for him. Of course, we also know he's sexist too. The Nazi guy, I mean. After she leaves, the Nazi guy gives Defense a rocket launcher as a gift and then shows him his secret stash of Nazi paraphernalia. Of course, as a patriotic American, Defense is disgusted by the Nazi guy's racism, citing that they are not the same. The Nazi guy tries to make a citizen's arrest, but Defense kills him, first by stabbing him with the switchblade he gets from his first encounter with the street gang, and then shoots him repeatedly, thus marking the first time in the movie that Defense kills someone directly. And it's obviously a guy no one's really gonna miss. So now Defense is officially, as he says in another harassing phone call to his ex-wife, past the point of no return. Then shit really starts getting real as Defense, who has swapped his shirt and tie for combat fatigues, confronts a roadwork crew and accuses them of doing unnecessary work to justify the city's budgets. Then when the foreman admits that there's nothing wrong with the street, mainly because he saw Defense's gun sticking out from the front of his pants, Defense pulls out his rocket launcher and says, "I'll give you something to fix." Of course, he gets help from a group of kids who thinks he's filming an action movie. And this is one of my favorite parts of this movie, and the funniest part is that the one kid who is showing Defense how to work the rocket launcher is saying he saw it in a movie. When Defense fires the rocket launcher, the rocket flies under the street and then it blows up the construction site from underneath. Great stuff. And it doesn't look like he killed any construction workers. That moment of greatness is soon followed by Defense walking across an old man's golf course, and after said old man hits a golf ball in Defense's direction, Defense pulls out his 12-gauge shotgun and shoots the man's golf cart, sending it rolling down into the lake. And he gives an old man a heart attack. And after finding out that his heart pills were in the cart he shot into the lake, Defense says, "Now you're gonna die wearing that stupid little hat. How does it feel?" Even though I'm not sure whether or not the old man dies or not, that scene was pretty hilarious. Now I know what you're saying. How come I haven't talked about either the ex-wife or Prendergast throughout this whole review? The truth is, when the movie isn't really focused on Defense, the movie slows down considerably. The ex-wife scenes at this point mainly consisted of her receiving phone calls from Defense and talking to the officers that are assigned to guard her house. And as for Prendergast, his scenes are either trying to follow the leads on Defense's activities, being berated by his co-workers, and henpecked by his wife. But as the movie goes on, Prendergast finally has a man-up moment and finally stands up to both his wife and even gets to punch out his co-worker who has been bullying him throughout the movie. And at the same time, we learned a little more about Defense from his mother, who he had to move back in with after his divorce and who he blamed for the divorce. And it's at this point also that Prendergast learns that Defense is on his way home to his ex-wife's and deduces that he plans to kill both her and his daughter before killing himself. Now, whether we know that for certain is kept vague. Sure, Defense is a little cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs, but I think his intention was to try to patch things up with his ex-wife so they can be a family again. In short, the whole movie is basically him chasing the illusion of home. By the time Defense arrives at his ex-wife's house, she has already fled, taking her daughter with her to the nearby pier. Prendergast arrives to arrest him, but he takes off, wounding his partner. Prendergast pursues Defense to the pier, where he finally encounters his ex-wife, and his daughter is happy to see him, but his ex-wife is terrified and urges him to get help. As this happens, Prendergast arrives, and while he acknowledges the fact that Defense has been ill-treated by society, it doesn't excuse the rampage he went on throughout the movie. The truth of this movie is that it's not only about Defense, but it's also about Prendergast. Two men who have played by the rules their entire lives and have been fucked over by society and have been marginalized by society, but they handle it in different ways. Defense by resorting to violence, while Prendergast's way is to get by the best you can. And while Prendergast is distracting Defense, the ex-wife steals Defense's gun and tosses it into the ocean while Prendergast pulls his gun out and insists that Defense gives himself up. Defense is shocked and finally asks the question that's been on everyone's mind the whole movie. "I'm the bad guy?" Theoretically, he does not see himself as the villain, but rather as a regular guy who wants things to go back to the way they used to be. Not just his family, but America as well. In fact, when Michael Douglas's father, the late legendary actor Kirk Douglas, defended the movie against critics who saw the movie as glorifying law-breaking, he said, "Michael's character is not the hero or the newest urban icon. He isn't the villain or the victim. Of course, we see many elements of our society that contributed to his madness. We even pity him, but the movie never condones his actions." Knowing full well that he can't handle watching his daughter growing up with him in jail, Defense tells Prendergast that he has another gun and challenges him to a showdown. By doing this, he's allowing this cop, who is just as marginalized as he is, to be his reluctant executioner so that his daughter can collect his life insurance money. As Defense goes for his gun, Prendergast shoots him dead. Now, while I wanted this to go to sequel, this is probably the only way this could end. But one question remains. Did Defense's actions throughout the movie make the world a better place? I would have to say no, because like I said before, the world is much worse now than it was in 1993. As far as performances go, there really isn't much to say as far as performances go. Everything's pretty solid across the board, especially when it comes to Michael Douglas. And I agree, this is his best performance since Gordon Gekko in Wall Street. This is a role where he dared to take risks and put a human face on the age-old stereotype of the angry white man that wants to get back at society for marginalizing him and taking away everything he's worked for and everything he is. Plus, it's refreshing to see Douglas do what we all wish we could do sometimes, like punch out a road rager, shoot up a phone booth because a guy waiting for the phone is pissing you off and harassing you. Which, of course, these days isn't really that much of a problem since the majority of us have smartphones, blowing up construction sites, and so on. In fact, a lot of us can relate to this character even today because a lot of us could be this character. I know I do sometimes. In the end, Falling Down was a box office hit, grossing over $40 million domestically against a $25 million budget. Reviews were mostly positive, but the movie was not without controversy. For one thing, the Korean American Coalition protested the film because of the treatment of the Korean American storekeeper, and Warner Brothers' Korean division canceled the release of the film fearing a boycott. A group of unemployed defense workers also protested their portrayal through the character Defense. In spite of the controversy, the movie holds a 75% critics score and an 84% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes, which makes Falling Down the fourth highest rated movie of Schumacher's career behind The Client, the 2000 movie Tigerland, and the classic 80s vampire flick The Lost Boys. Personally, that score should be higher because, again, this was the best movie of Schumacher's career. Both this and A Time to Kill are better Schumacher movies than The Client. The late Roger Ebert gave this movie a positive review, saying that what is fascinating about the Douglas character is written and played as the core of sadness in his soul. Yes, by the time we meet him, he has gone over the edge, but there is no exhilaration in his rampage, no release. He seems weary and confused, and in his actions, he unconsciously follows scripts that he may have learned from the movies or on the news, where other frustrated misfits vent their rage on innocent bystanders. And I agree with this statement because, like I said before, a lot of us could be this guy. Hell, even I could be this guy. And I've seen this character before, whether it's this movie, Taxi Driver, or most recently, Joker. More so Taxi Driver, which is one of my all-time favorite movies, where the YouTube comments sections on Taxi Driver related videos has people saying, "I am Travis Bickle." Same could be said for "I am Defense" or "I am Joker." So what does this cat here think about this movie? Not only do I think that this is one of the best revenge movies ever made, but like I keep saying, this is the best movie Schumacher ever directed. It's a movie clearly not to be missed. Back in my original review in 2015, I implied that the main reason why this movie is so underrated is because of the fact that Joel Schumacher directed Batman and Robin. However, the other reason is because of the harsh, politically correct world we live in right now. And as far as the article I mentioned that Falling Down would not be made in today's politically charged society, to that I say screw that. Because at the end of the day, Falling Down continues to be just as relevant today as it was 30 years ago. And with that comes to an end episode 1 of Movies to Go with me, your friendly neighborhood Blackcatloner. In the meantime, here are my social media sites. First up, I am on YouTube, of course. Subscribe to my channel, youtube.com/@Blackcatloner1. Also, follow me on Twitter at twitter.com/blackcatloner, where in addition to shitposting about movies and fawning over VTubers, I post notifications when I release a new video, short, or this podcast. Also, follow me on Instagram at instagram.com/blackcatloner1, where I also post updates there, as well as some of the shorts I post to YouTube. Not to mention some nice pics, too. I mean, I gotta do something besides click like on a lot of Insta models. So, that being said, thank you for watching and listening to the Movies to Go podcast. I'm Blackcatloner, and I will see you next time. Same Black Cat time, same Black Cat channel.